Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Israel Explained. Today we have a lot of news to deal with. So, as we know, the standing of Israel in the world and support for its operation have been very precarious for quite a while, but especially since the WCK um, operation that ended tragically with seven aid workers killed. We knew that today Biden and Netanyahu would have a phone conversation, and we knew it would probably be a tough one. But what we didn't know is that there would be a real change in policy, or at least a threat of a change in policy by the Biden administration. According to Barak Ravid, who's the big expert on these sorts of things, they had a call. Can't decide how long it was, by the way. Israel says it was 45 minutes. The United States says it was under half an hour, where he called for an immediate ceasefire and said that there's a need to protect innocent civilians in Gaza and improve the humanitarian situation. However, an official later told Amichai Stein, and another Israeli reporter, that this meant a ceasefire in the context of a hostage deal rather than a unilateral one, which is an important clarification. Biden also told Netanyahu that Israel must announce and implement a series of concrete and measurable steps to protect aid workers and address humanitarian suffering. According to the readout, quote, Biden made clear that U.S. policy concerning Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate actions on these steps. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken echoed that point in a press conference, and he said, quote, if we don't see the changes we need to see, there will be a change in our policy. Then White House spokesperson John Kirby said that the steps the U.S. expects Israel to take on these matters include increasing the amount of aid that gets into Gaza, opening additional crossings to Gaza, movement towards a ceasefire, better protecting civilians, and better protecting aid workers. Kirby concluded by saying if there are no changes in policy, there will have to be a change in ours. So that's all three officials saying that there will be a change in policy unless Israel follows these steps. As for the hostages, Biden said, quote, he underscored that an immediate ceasefire is essential to stabilize and improve the humanitarian situation and protect innocent civilians, and he urged the prime minister to empower his negotiators to conclude a deal without delay to bring the hostages home. The word empower is very important here because there's been a lot of discussions over whether the negotiators have a mandate or don't have a mandate to make concessions on the ground while talking to the mediators. And what Netanyahu has done is he's limited the ability of the negotiators to do that. So much so that some of them have threatened to quit because they don't feel like they're empowered to make a deal. Biden is telling him to empower them to make a deal and reach a deal. Now, what would happen if Israel didn't follow these steps? That was left unsaid by Kirby, Blinken, and Biden. But Chris Coons, of a Democratic senator from Delaware, one of the top Democratic backers of Israel and a close ally of Biden's, said for the first time on Thursday that he was open to conditioning aid based on how Israel conducts the war. That is likely an administration position that they are running through Coons, who's not officially part of the administration, in order to have plausible deniability. So that's probably where things are going if Israel doesn't do what Biden wants it to do. Now, we can't separate this from what's happening in the UK. The main opposition parties in the UK, Labour, the Liberals, the Scots, are saying that the British government should consider suspending arms sales to Israel. And there's a reason for that. The vast majority of people in the UK think so. 56% of Brits think that they should stop selling arms to Israel. Only 17% think that they should continue to sell, with the rest undecided. Meanwhile, three former British Supreme Court justices and 600 other senior legal professionals and academics said not only that arms should stop being sold to Israel, but also the trade deal between Israel and the UK should be looked at again, as well as sanctions against those who have made statements inciting genocide against Palestinians, which could theoretically include some of the biggest officials in the country, yeah. So Israel is finding itself on the verge of having no support at all from any country in the world. This couldn't come at a worse timing than right now. Before this statement was made, all the headlines in Israel were about a possible Iranian attack in retaliation to the assassination that took place in Damascus. There had been a lot of talk about that. And in order to deter the Iranians and in order to help Israel react to any attack, the support of the United States and its coalition that has been working in the Red Sea is necessary. And Biden is denying Israel that support at this dramatic moment. The president addressed that in the talk. According to the readout, it says the two leaders also discussed public Iranian threats against Israel and the Israeli people. President Biden made clear that the United States strongly supports Israel in the face of those threats. End quote. But the fact that he said that doesn't really change much. The distance that is being created between Israel and the United States right now, unprecedented distance, at least during this war, sends a different message. It sends a message that the United States does not have Israel's back. And I think that's very dangerous at this moment. So I've been a supporter of the Biden administration and continue to be. But I think that it's a mistake to create daylight between Israel and the United States at this moment when Israel is under threat from Iran. Not only because I think that the U.S. should support Israel in general, but also because it's in the geostrategic interests of the United States to weaken Iran. And this does not weaken Iran, it strengthens Iran. Be that as it may, Israel is on the verge, it seems, of losing the war. That might sound dramatic, but the goals for the war were very clear. Remove Hamas from power, which has not been done. Get back the hostages, which has not been done or done very partially. Bring back the residents of the North and South. The residents in the South have been brought back to some extent. The residents in the North are still up. And of course, do all this while maintaining American support. Uh, so none of the goals have been accomplished, and Israel might come out of this, if things, let's say, stop now, far weaker than it was before, proving unable to defeat Hamas and with far less support from the United States and its NATO allies than it had before the war. So Israel doesn't want to do either of the following: stop the war now, that way Hamas wins, or continue without American support and lose its long-term diplomatic standing at the as a price for that. So what Israel needs to do is it needs to look at what the Biden administration has said and grab onto the escape hatch that the Biden administration has offered. These statements include several things that Israel needs to do, all of which Israel should do exactly to the letter when it comes to defending um, humanitarian supply routes, when it comes to protecting civilians. These are all things that Israel needs to do to the letter. But I think Israel has to do a little bit more than that in order to reestablish goodwill with the United States. All this not in order just to get better relations with the United States, but in order to be able to go into Rafah and finish the war. Because if Israel doesn't do that, it will have been defeated. And I think that if Israel loses this war, it will face existential challenges in the very near future. But I also think if it wins this war, but loses the support of the United States in the long term, the same will happen. So it has no choice but to very delicately thread the needle and try to achieve both things at once. That was a lot more of a possibility in the past. It was a lot easier to do that 2 months ago. It was a lot easier to do that 2 weeks ago. It's not impossible, but it's harder. It's delicate balance. Israel hasn't shown that it's able to do these delicate balances, but it's going to have to. Otherwise, the repercussions will be very severe. So, what does it need to do? These are all things that I've already said that Israel should do, but now it absolutely has to do them, has to do them immediately. Send the IDF in to take over the aid routes and ensure delivery directly to Palestinians. It can't have either Palestinians starving to death, and it can't have attacks on supply routes. So the IDF needs to take a much more major role in securing it on the ground and completely disallowing airstrikes on these routes. They've been deconflicted, but they haven't been deconflicted enough. Remove any limitations on aid, just allowing as much aid as possible to everyone. Start the evacuation of Rafah with the aid of international organizations, including the UN, including anyone who will help. Build tent camps, start returning people to their homes, start rebuilding their homes so that they can return to them. Do everything you can so that the people in Rafah have comfortable and livable places to go to with food. So the two things tie in together, the aid and the housing. And both need to be provided. This needs to be taken very seriously, not the sort of haphazard plans that we've seen until now. Netanyahu needs to go on TV and say that the war is entering a new phase where the concerns of Palestinian citizens and humanitarian organizations will be taken more seriously. That should include an apology for having gone too far in the war before, in endangering civilian lives, something that Israel has not done up until now. It has pretended that there isn't a problem, and this problem has come back to bite it in the ass. Start cooperation with the PA for a day after plan. Start working with the PA on civilian conditions in Gaza. Start working with more Arab governments and the EU on the same matter. Accept and state that there will be a Palestinian state at the end of this conflict, and this conflict is a step towards removing Hamas so that peace can be possible at the end of it. If Israel does all these things, then maybe it can go into Rafah and maintain its decent relations with the United States and not receive a killing blow to its support in the world. I think it's still doable, but barely. Israel needs to act now, and Israel needs to be as decisive as it can be about these things while remaining committed to the goal of eradicating Hamas, because if it doesn't, there will be hell to pay. Okay, I have some questions. Pratchett Guyman asks me, is it fair the WCK attack and other attacks like it as indiscriminate as Jose Andres did? Well, that's a good one. The end result is indiscriminate. The end result is that Israel targeted a target that it should not have. Calling it indiscriminate is almost weird because it looks like the drones that attacked the convoy went into absolute kill protocol. So it's not so much, it looks like they decided to destroy the convoy for whatever reason, whether it's AI, as I've seen some reports, whether they were misidentified. So it was almost discriminate, but in the worst possible way, which is one of the reasons that this attack is causing so many, so many shocks. But I think there's no question that Israel tries to avoid killing civilians. But I think there's also no question that Israel hasn't done enough. By definition, hasn't done enough because it's turned into a real Achilles heel in this operation. Cool Snow 7 asks, and this is an old question that I didn't answer last time. Reading between the lines, the U.S. invited Gantz to the United States to see if he was someone they could talk to besides Bibi, and were disappointed. By contrast, they followed up by trying Gallant, who seemed to smooth over tensions with the Biden administration immediately. Well, in retrospect, not all the tensions. What could have been so off-putting about Gantz to the Americans? Ideologically, he isn't a perfect fit like Ehud Barak or Yair Lapid, but Gallant is further and more hawkish. And the leaks from the meetings don't give any indications either. Do you have any guesses? Okay, so to sum up, why did it look like Gantz's meeting didn't go so well and Gallant's did? I don't need guesses. I know more or less why. So Gantz does agree more ideologically with the United States than Gallant, but there's a big difference between Gantz and Gallant. Gantz is the kind of guy who goes by the book. So when the Americans asked Gantz to do various things, um, and to push Bibi in various ways, he was much more willing to say, the Americans, this is an Israeli affair, don't get involved. Um, and he showed a certain loyalty to the government, which he feels is part of his job as a minister. And correctly so, I should say. Meanwhile, Gallant is a completely different character. Gallant has no interest in decorum, no interest in formal rules. He's a how do I get from point A to point B kind of guy? How do I solve this problem? And we've seen that a lot in this government. He's perfectly happy to stand up to Bibi and stick a finger in his eye when he feels that it's important for the policies that he wants to achieve, maybe also for his career. But he's the kind of guy who will shake things up. So when the Americans say, "Will you do this, that, and the other?" and he sees that this will help with relations with the United States, he's much more likely to say to Biden, yeah, sure, I'll do that, or to offer some kind of creative solution, while Gantz is less creative and more of a stick in the mud. So it's easier in a way to work with Gallant, although Gantz is definitely a more reliable partner. Sonny LaBouffe asks me, if you had to predict at this stage, do you think the Rafah operation will happen? It seems like Netanyahu is entirely unserious about the whole affair. And even if it does, do you think it's now too late to have an impact on the course of the war? Well, now that we've gotten this statement from the Biden administration, that question takes on a whole new meaning. My guess is that eventually Israel will have to go into Rafah because he's not going to get a hostage deal. I really don't believe he's going to get a hostage deal. Hamas has no reason to go to a hostage deal at this point. So if he wants to look like he's at least trying to get the hostages back, like he's at least trying to win this war, um, and he'll go in. It also gives him an opportunity now to look like the big hero standing up to Biden, especially since Biden has gone this far to stop it. So my guess is it will happen. Will it affect the course of the war? Yes. It means Hamas won't govern anything in Gaza if Israel follows it up properly. My concern, as I said before, isn't so much this won't have an effect on Hamas, it will, as much as that the price Israel will pay diplomatically will make it almost worthwhile to Iran and its allies to sacrifice Hamas if Israel has too much daylight with the United States and loses the support of other NATO allies. Harry Newhoff asks, could you offer a prediction regarding the future of Hamas Gaza and the northern region? Oh boy. Well, okay, let's start with the easier part, the northern region, Lebanon. There will be no war in Lebanon. I think this pretty much ends any speculation about that, unless Hezbollah and Iran make it untenable for Israel to ignore Lebanon. Israel doesn't have the backing for the United States, and I don't think that Netanyahu has the backing from the Israeli people to go to war in Lebanon. I think if he tries it, it'll be the last thing he tries. I think that'll be the end of his administration. That's my feeling. He's smart enough to know that. As for Gaza, well, it looks like what's going to happen is the following. Unfortunately, this is what I see as the most likely. Israel goes into Rafah, makes some half-hearted attempt to evacuate civilians. It won't be enough. Encounters sanctions of some kind, probably nothing crippling. Stop of arms sales for a while. Some countries might declare full sanctions. The US would probably still veto full sanctions in the UN, so that won't pass. But a lot of countries will stop selling arms to Israel. Israel will be more isolated than ever. Israel will have taken over all of Gaza. There will be a guerrilla war in Gaza. Um, Israeli soldiers will die while its standing in the world deteriorates. Eventually, Netanyahu's government will fall because of protests, opposition, and all that. A new prime minister will come in, probably Gantz, and then Gantz will have the very difficult task of trying to repair relations with the world, which he will probably have some success in, but I don't think things will ever be the same again. It's not the worst outcome in the world, probably, because it will involve removing Hamas, and Gantz might be able to negotiate some kind of deal regarding a future Palestinian state or autonomy that will help repair Israel's relations, but it's also not a good outcome. Okay, I hope things will look better by the time we have the next episode. If you like what I do here, support me on Patreon at Shael Media. Listen to my podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast, and I will see you here next time, hopefully, well, I always say this, with better news.